is a series where we speak with leaders who have created meaningful impact through technology, leadership, and transformation, and explore not just what they have built, but how they think about creating value and driving change. I'm really delighted to have Paul with me today. Paul has held leadership roles across government, healthcare, life science, consulting, and defense, including CIO, chief architect, and CTO positions. Throughout his career, he has consistently focused on helping organizations use technology to drive meaningful business outcomes, build high performing teams, and navigate large scale transformations. Paul, wonderful to have you here.
To be with you, Vikram. Thank you.
Amazing. All right. So, looking at your fascinating journey across, multiple industries, different types of roles, maybe if you can give all our listeners a quick overview of how the journey has been, Paul, so that people also know more about you, and then we can, take the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Vikram. And yeah, very happy to talk about my journey. I think one of the things I always find quite interesting as an aside is when people talk about their careers and they're talking retrospectively about their careers, it always sounds like it was quite an orderly progression. Whereas for me, mine's been, if you're familiar with probability theory, mine's been a bit more like a random walk where I go over here and go over there, and I can after the event rationalize things a little bit, but it's not been a conscious journey, as you'll understand. So I started my career in academia, actually. I did that for a few years. I was lecturing at the University of Leeds in computer science before I reached the conclusion that academia wasn't really the career I wanted to follow. Then through a combination of fortunate circumstances and personal changes, I just got married. And my wife and I, we moved to Denmark. I got an opportunity there. So I ended up joining a small company in Denmark. From there, I went to a slightly bigger company called Systematic Software Engineering in Denmark, and I actually learned a lot from that company. And I'll come back to that in a moment on some of the things I learned there. But they specialized in defense and healthcare, and they went through in the time I was there, when I joined at the start of 2002, I think there were about 170 people there. By the time I left in 2006 or 7, something like that, there were well over 600 people there. So it was growing organically very quickly.
Amazing.
From there, I worked on various projects, really interesting projects, before I got seconded to the US, again with systematic software engineering, but I was working on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program with Lockheed Martin in the US. Again, that was a fascinating program. And
amazing.
It was really interesting, just physically. The place we were working at was it was on the mezzanine level of the factory where they assembled fighter aircraft.
Wow.
So at the time, they were assembling F-16s. So all the parts would come in one end, and there was a 1.5 mile long assembly line, and fighter aircraft would roll out at the other end. So it was really, really, really interesting.
Wow.
I did that for 18 months, and then I decided I wanted to move back to the UK. So my wife and I, we came back to the UK. I stumbled into a role working on the big NHS national program for IT. So this was a nationwide program to roll out centralized electronic patient record systems to all healthcare providers in England. And it was my first kind of experience of working that closely with the UK public sector. And it was an interesting experience. It was a challenging program, but actually I think despite the challenges, we did a good job. After that, I kind of went into a variety of roles. So I spent a bit of time consulting. I joined a big healthcare company where I got my first kind of C-suite role as CIO. I spent some while working in a couple of services companies. I joined a Japanese pharmaceutical company where I was in role for 7 years, which is, again, culturally, was a very interesting experience, before moving into my current role in 2024 in the UK Civil Service, working for Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs as Chief Technology Officer. So as I say, it's not been a kind of linear, kind of well thought through journey. It's been a succession of opportunities, occasional missteps, and very much trying to adopt the fail fast approach when I've realized that something isn't for me.
Amazing. I mean, such an interesting and fascinating journey you had, Paul. Now, looking at such an amazing journey, I'm sure there must have been a lot of uh, areas where you would have created impact, some amazing transformations. So, is there any specific impactful initiative or transformation that is very close to your heart that you maybe want to share a little more story about it with the listeners?
Yeah, so, and it's actually probably in the grand scheme of things, it's one of the smaller things, but culturally, it was a really challenging thing. So when I was working at the Japanese pharmaceutical company, like many organizations, I've seen it in other organizations, we had what I would describe as an accidental cloud strategy.
Mm.
So we were working with multiple hyperscalers, but there was no rationale for the choices we'd made. There was no particular rationale for how we chose how to place our workloads. There wasn't even any particular rationale for whether we should deploy in cloud or we still had on-premises data centers, should we be using those? And initially, the overall cloud strategy wasn't part of my remit, and I find this quite frustrating because the person whose remit it was in didn't see any need to change the status quo, whereas I just saw huge opportunity going to waste. Through some organizational changes, it actually came into the area of responsibility. But because of the history, again, I suspect this is not unusual for many organizations. There were lots of entrenched positions. People had their preferences around a particular hyperscaler, or they thought this is how we should use cloud, this is how we should use on-premises data centers. So I had a very clear view about what we needed to do, but as ever with these things, this is something I always come back to. The technology is always the easy piece. It's getting people on that journey with you and getting them to buy in with that direction. So I spent quite a long time, so a matter of months, having weekly calls with a group of influential stakeholders who all have very different opinions,
Mm-hmm.
just walking them through step by step how we should be shaping our future cloud strategy. When we had differences of opinion, we would agree what data we needed to go away, we'd need to gather to be able to form a decision, cutting across those differences of opinion. So it was a rigorous, laborious process, but that's what was needed in order to really get these changes to stick and to get that level of buy-in. And eventually we got to a point where we had a cloud strategy, which all of those key stakeholders who previously fundamentally disagreed, everyone bought into because they all felt they contributed to it. They all felt they had a part of it. And to be honest, it was pretty much what I thought at the outset we ought to be doing. But as I say, I had to get these people on that journey with me. So it's a relatively small example, but in a microcosm, that kind of captures the things I find really interesting about technology, because there are some really interesting and challenging technology questions out there. But what I've always seen is that the difficult part is the business change and getting people with you.
So, I mean, that's a very good insight about leaders who are trying to bring about change, who are trying to come up with new strategies. As you mentioned, technology is not that difficult or complicated, but getting everybody aligned, getting everybody to agree on is something which is far more challenging, especially if you're, taking a new role in an organization, because there are a lot of expectations from you. And sometimes you have the platform authority and everything, but still aligning everybody's expectations is a big challenge. So, what would be the most important attribute that you would recommend to a leader, who is getting into this position, since you've done it? So maybe, your recommendation for anybody who is going through this challenge, what would be the most important thing that he or she should consider?
Well, I'll take a slight liberty with your question, if I may, Vikram. There's two things I would like to bring out. One is, I think empathy is really important,
Mm,
because when you're using technology to drive change, as I say, that change is going to impact people.
mm,
And you need to empathize with people to understand what that experience is going to look like for them, and to understand the fears they may have and help them to address those fears. And if you don't do that, it's very difficult to successfully deliver change. The other key attribute, I think, is resilience, because
mm.
when you're trying to drive these kinds of changes, it's much, much easier to stick with the status quo. And most of the time, people will say, no, I understand what you want to do, and it's fine for you to do it for everyone else, but I'm going to carry on doing what I want to do. And maintaining that resilience to keep driving forward in the face of challenge, rejection, active or passive disengagement.
Mm.
It could be tough, and emotionally and mentally it can be tough, and you need to maintain that personal resilience. You need a strong network around you to do that. I have a network of peers. I have colleagues I've worked with in many organizations over the years. I work with a coach and a mentor as well. These are all the kinds of things which I use to build up my own personal resilience.
Amazing, amazing. So in terms of, that those are very good attributes that every leader needs to exhibit when they are going through these kind of situation. How much of the communication in terms of what business value this strategy, when executed or implemented, will bring about for the organization, and how much of that actually plays a role in getting everybody aligned?
So I think that There's probably two sides to this. One is, most organizations will have some kind of formal investment appraisal process. And for
Mm,
that, you'll need to put together a business case which says, I'm spending this amount, benefits of this amount, this is bigger than that, and therefore we go ahead and do it. I think my caution there would be most organizations try to translate all of the benefits into cash equivalent,
mm,
into financial equivalent. And in some cases that works. I want to go and build this new system. As a result, I can shut down all these other systems.
mm,
Be straightforward. In other cases, though, I think there could be benefits, but they're not necessarily always that tangible. And the example I would give is if you're looking at upgrading something, an enterprise system, an ERP system, or something like that, your business case is not really going to be based on cash benefits because fundamentally it's probably going to do pretty much the same thing it's doing now. It might help you to be a bit more efficient, but it's relatively rare in my experience that you get significant efficiency benefits from that kind of upgrade program. But there's an element of you just have to get on and do it. And that's much more difficult to capture in a business case. Sometimes you see that captured as people put a number around the risk avoidance or something like that. And again, if you need to jump through some hoops, which our financial colleagues have put in front of us, that's how you do it. But for me, it always feels slightly disingenuous trying to put numbers to that because it's very difficult to quantify that kind of benefit. The reality is sometimes you just have to go and do this. And spending a year and a half trying to put together an investment case is probably not good use of time.
true. Absolutely. In terms of, you've managed a lot of teams, you've built high performing teams, for any kind of strategy to be executed or implemented, a leader is always dependent on, how good the team is. So in your organizations, wherever you have been trying to build your team, what are the most important characteristics that you try and find in your team members, that actually makes them consistently perform to their potential or to high standard?
So I think for me, the most important thing which drives high performance is creating an environment where people actually enjoy their work.
Mm,
Now, I always reflect if you look at the amount of time you spend in a working environment as a proportion of your week or your year or your working life, it's a big chunk of time. I mean, a third, a half of your life, it's somewhere between that. If you're not enjoying it, that's far too much of your life to be giving up for time you're not really getting value out of. So I always put a high premium on trying to create environments where team members will enjoy what they're doing. And of course, there's always some things you have to do some tasks you don't really enjoy doing. But as long as in the round you're doing things which you enjoy, that's how I've seen how you get to high performance. Now, breaking that down a little bit, I will usually hire based on attitude
mhm,
because I need to be able to hire people who I know if I create the right environment for them, they will enjoy that and they'll thrive. But then the other thing, I know we're talking about books and learning and thinking later, but I
mm,
read this book some years back now called Drive by Daniel Pink.
mhm,
And it's all about how you motivate, it's specifically about software engineers, but it's all about how you motivate them. And
mm.
that really affected my thinking about how I create high performing teams because a lot of the traditional thinking, as I'd read at the time, management theory, hadn't really quite worked for me. When I read this, I thought, okay, that's really started to make sense to me. So I use some of the principles in that to help me to structure my teams.
Wow, amazing. Any specific principle from the book that really, influenced you? And, because there are always, when you go through a book or multiple books, there is
Yeah.
so much of, learnings that come out of it.
And
But is there anything, is one or two special principle that, that you
yeah.
really enjoyed implementing? Maybe if you can share with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's basically his theory is that there are three things that drive motivation in software engineers. One is autonomy, so
Mm,
the ability to define your own role, having you know, having that independence to determine your own priorities. Second is mastery, so the opportunity to become really, really good at what you do. And the
right.
third is purpose, so actually being in a role where you are contributing to a purpose which really talks to you in your social values. And he builds up the entire book around that. But those are the three principles I've always gone back to when I'm trying to hire people, when I'm looking at how we design roles. These are the things I'm thinking about.
Amazing. I mean, do you think, I mean, while listening to those three principles, what I could relate is it's not just the software engineering, resources, but these three principles could probably be applied potentially across any any vertical, even in, families nowadays, there is a huge challenge to basically motivate your kids to do certain stuff. But
Yeah.
if you are actually able to talk to them and really and make them understand why you are trying to do, what exactly
Mm.
is the bigger purpose. I mean, I remember I had a discussion with my son's about 12 years old, and was trying to make him get more into workout, or change the eating habits, but it was not so easy to make him do what I really wanted him to do. The moment I started having discussions about what do you want to do, what are your goals, he's very much into cricket and he wants to become a fast bowler. And then when I started having all those discussions around that purpose, that goal, things became easier, because then there is a different motivation for him to understand and follow. So I think I kind of relate with all these principles can be applied to motivate anybody to do, what their purpose could really be.
Yeah, I think so. But one of the points that he makes, and this is really interesting. He demonstrated this through kind of citing a number of experiments which have been performed.
Mm-hmm.
Software engineers are not driven by financial reward. So money is a hygiene factor. It needs to be at a certain level.
Right.
People need to be able to pay their bills. But beyond that, it's not the kind of thing which drives high performance. Whereas if you look in financial services, for example,
Mm,
very much, it's people are driven by financial reward there.
right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good distinction. And yes, because software engineers usually are not taking money as their primary motivation, of course, that is one of the need that everybody would have. But yeah, very rightly said. Is there any leadership lesson, that you learned hard way? I mean, sometimes there are certain situations where you feel, "Oh, if I knew this earlier, I would have handled it in a different way."
Yeah, I mean, there's many of those. I'll highlight a couple. One is a little bit flippant, but when I moved to Denmark,
Mm.
the company I was working at initially, our business language was English, so all meetings took place in English. But as soon as we broke for a break, people would go outside, have a cup of coffee, and they'd all be discussing things in Danish. And at the time, I didn't speak any Danish. Go
Mhm.
back into the meeting after the break, and all of a sudden, I've got all the actions. So my lesson from that was I need to learn Danish so that I could make sure that I'm participating in these conversations. But a slightly more serious example, one of the things I learned when I was working in Japan, or for the Japanese company, was in the Japanese culture, they really don't like saying no to you. So until you got an explicit yes in a meeting from all stakeholders present, you didn't have agreement for anything. And if people were staying quiet, it meant they wanted to say no, but they didn't like to say it because they thought it was rude to say no. And it
Mm.
took me a long time to learn this lesson, but actually it's been a very useful lesson for me to learn because it means now I'm much more inclined to secure explicit agreement rather than assume that silence means agreement.
So anybody who is trying to get into a new role, or at least a new place, and if there could be differences in terms of the culture of the people, it is really important to understand where you are going, what kind of people you are going to work with. When most of my work has been with US customers. I mean, it's been 25 years in technology industry, but since last 2 3 years, I started focusing in Middle East, and there is a huge difference in the mindset. It becomes really difficult because you're coming from a different way of working to almost a different structure, different understanding, different mindset. So yeah, I mean, that's an amazing insight for anybody who is stepping into a new place. Understanding with whom you are going to work, how they think, how they behave. If you are able to understand those things, prepare yourself. That places you in a much better place, as opposed to going there and then trying to learn on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also goes back to my point earlier about empathy. I mean, if you're working with people in a different culture, you need to understand, you need to empathize with them, understand their values, their norms, and how they expect you to behave. And the
Mm.
more you can do that, again, when you're driving change, the more likely they are to accept your views on the change which may impact them.
Any advice for somebody who is stepping newly into CTO role? Because I'm trying to create these discussions for a lot of aspiring people who want to grow as leaders, and the best way is to learn from people who already have experience of performing those roles, who have successfully led their career. So any specific advice for somebody who is stepping into that role, a CTO role specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, CTO is a slightly strange role and a slightly strange title because within the title of CTO, there's quite a broad spectrum. So if you look at a typical startup, a CTO is basically going to be the senior developer.
Hmm.
making all the tech decisions, but expected to be hands-on. Whereas you could, in a mature enterprise, you could have a CTO who's actually looking at maintaining operational resilience and maintaining business services. So I think one of the things is to be clear about what kind of CTO is being expected of you,
Hmm.
what kind of CTO you think you are, and if there are any gaps there, what is your plan going to be to address that? Because no one can do all of it. So
Hmm.
I think don't be scared if there are gaps there, but understand what they are and deal with that explicitly.
So setting up the right expectations with the board, with management in terms of what exactly is expected out of the CTO role, and then trying to get those things done. I mean, as you rightly mentioned, nobody is perfect in a situation to be able to do each and everything. But as long as you are able to align the expectations, if you know these are the gaps, you probably can try and work on it, or you can probably even try and get somebody else who can fill in those gaps rather than taking up the burden or load or stress of doing it yourself. As
Yeah,
a leader, I think this is much more important to get things done rather than you only do it.
yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. You mentioned about one of the book for which helped you drive the motivation in the team. Any specific book or article that is very close to your heart? I remember in our previous discussion you mentioned about an article about strategy. What a strategy! Any specific learnings from that article that you would like to share? Because you've worked on a lot of projects, devised a lot of strategies across different organizations. So anything specific from that article that you would like to share with the listeners?
Yeah. I mean, really like that article. So the article we're talking about now is "What Is Strategy" by Michael Porter,
Hmm.
and it remains my favorite article, my favorite management article. I will reread it regularly. I mean, I love it for the clarity of thinking. It's very well written, but it really helped me to understand the difference between a strategy where you're really trying to differentiate yourself
Hmm.
versus a strategy where you're just trying to be a bit cheaper than competition, and therefore thinking about how you can, if you have a real kind of differentiated position, how to protect that. Conversely, if you're not going for that differentiated position, how do you maintain an element of cost differentiation or product differentiation, product leadership in a market environment where your competitors, everything moves so quickly, you're constantly chasing you and you can't stand still. Understanding that dichotomy, I just found absolutely fascinating. I think something about it that appeals to how I think about things and distinguishing between kind of short term what we need to do versus bigger picture strategically where we want to go in the future.
I'm sure listeners would definitely want to go through the article and get their understanding and learning improved as well. Any more specific sources of articles? I know you mentioned HBR, McKinsey. I mean, these are very well known sources for any of the aspiring leaders who are listening to the podcast. Any specific source or article that you would recommend apart from this?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, there's the usual suspects: HBR,
Hmm.
MIT Sloan Management Review, MIT Technology Review. I enjoy listening to TED Talks as well. There's some really interesting speakers on TED Talks. Keeping an eye out, so following people on LinkedIn, keeping an eye out for blogs they may be writing. So there's a former government CTO, guy called David Knott, who writes a fantastic weekly article on LinkedIn. Very, very thoughtful writer. Highly recommend that. But I think maintain more generally just maintaining that external awareness in your own way, doing your own kind of technology environment scanning to understand what's happening because things move so quickly, and relying on vendors, analysts, and so on to keep you updated slow these days.
Amazing, amazing. There is a lot of buzz around AI. I think there is more of hype and less of reality when it comes to AI. A lot of people are confused about what truly is automation versus AI. Teams are expected to work in a different way. CTOs, CIOs are having a different level of pressure coming in from board to optimize the operations, cost cutting. How is your organization, your team placed, and what are your thoughts around how AI is changing the ways of working now?
So there's a lot to unpack there. So specifically in my organization, I lead on AI in my organization, and I'm a strong advocate of it.
Hmm.
But I'll come back to that in a moment about your high point. But I'm a strong advocate of it. I see huge opportunity. But I think one of the things we're starting to learn is you need to be quite intelligent about how you pick your use cases. What we're seeing so far is that AI is particularly effective in software engineering. So we have a large, it's very well documented, a large legacy technology estate, and we've been investing significant amounts in modernizing that technology. What we've seen over the last year and a half or so is that by adopting an AI first approach to this modernization program, we've been able to massively accelerate that and also reduce the cost of it. So AI for us in that context has been demonstrably and tangibly valuable to us. When you start to look at broader business operations, that's when I think it starts to get a bit more challenging. And there are clearly some opportunities. So if you look at chatbots, things like that, and the ability to deliver more responsive and scalable customer service and customer experience, AI can be very powerful there. But I'll give you an example of the downside of this. I interacted with a chatbot recently to get my car, and I had a problem with my car. I needed to put it into the garage to be serviced.
Mhm.
I interact with the chatbot that says that's all fine. You're all booked in for this particular day. The garage rings me the day before. It says here we've got you booked in for this particular service, and they explain to me what they've been told I wanted, which is totally different to what I told the chatbot I wanted them to do. So it's just as well they rang me, because otherwise it would have been quite unfortunate. So I think that really reflects, to your point, that reflects the reality of where we are with AI. I think part of the challenge is that there are a lot of people highly incentivized to hype AI. There are a lot of people who are trying to generate businesses out of it. Again, if you look on LinkedIn, there's the vast majority of content, at least on my feed on LinkedIn these days, is about AI. Most of it is quite poor quality, to be honest. I think a lot of it's actually AI generated. So I think one of the things as technology leaders we need to do to make sure that we are properly representing our organizations
Mm.
is to equip ourselves with understanding where is AI proven to be effective? Where do we suspect it might be, but we need to validate that? Where do we think that just looks like hype to me? I don't think there's any real value there. And I think we're all learning this as we go. But that's the lens that I look through when I consider AI opportunities.
Yeah, and one more thing which is more or less a big concern nowadays with with the way things are scaling with usage of AI, AI usage cost is becoming a huge challenge for a lot of leaders and organizations. So what are your recommendations in terms of technology leader? Every technology leader is one or the other way, going to have some sort of impact of AI usage cost. So what would be your recommendations, like things to consider or keep in mind, people who are really looking to get into this modernization now? I mean, people who have already done, they may experiment, they may have paid a lot more money or optimized, but people who are actually looking to invest now, are there any specific things that they should keep in mind before they move into it?
So I think there's a few things. One is whichever vendor you choose, you need to be clear and they need to be clear with you about their charging model, how they're going to charge you, what it's going to cost, and how
Right.
you will manage that, and whether you can cap it in any way. I think the other thing is there are some very powerful open source models out there at the
Mm-hmm.
moment. They don't have the same level of marketing behind them as some of the big AI vendors. But what I've seen is you can actually get a long way using some of the open source models.
Mm-hmm.
You can either host that yourself or on your own infrastructure, or there are companies who'll host that for you. But the cost, the price point is a fraction of what you pay with one of the big vendors. So if you are concerned about costs, that would be a way to help you to ease you in gently, to help you to understand what your cost profile might look like if you move towards a fully commercial vendor.
Yeah, and in fact, it's a very good suggestion. I mean, if somebody can find a vendor who can utilize the existing open source models, have on-premise deployments or local deployments, which can save a lot of cost, as well as I think the data safety and compliance would be relatively way higher as compared to trying to use any of these public LLMs, because there is no sort of control or governance when you're trying to integrate these kind of solutions in your application.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing, I think there was in the press over the weekend about US government banning non-nationals from Mythos and Fable from Anthropic. I think with the prevalence of AI now, we all, as technology leaders, we need to be thinking about the business resilience risk we may be creating
Mm.
by building operational processes which are dependent on a particular AI vendor.
Right. Well, I think this is something which is going to be really helpful for a lot of listeners who either are going to step into that role or already into that role, but looking for, getting into the strategies for modernization. One way or the other, this is going to be a topic of discussion, I believe, for, the coming months. So thank you so much for sharing all the insights, giving very good tips and strategies. I'm sure everybody who's listening to or who would be listening to will definitely find it very helpful. I really appreciate you taking out time and sharing your journey and story. I have enjoyed every moment of the discussion so far, and truly grateful from the bottom of my heart for you being here.
Thank you, Vikram. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Paul. Take care.
You too.